Today, I wanted to hop on here briefly and talk about this concept that I keep seeing from other creators that I really respect and admire about the difference between me and we language. And I did a post on this on my Instagram, so apologies, you'll have to go check that one out last week before the holidays. One thing that comes up often in work with my clients, both male and female, I coach men and women who are early in the dating phase to help them approach dating in a more secure way so that they set the right boundaries and therefore end up in the right relationships instead of spending a lot of time in relationships that aren't quite fulfilling for them because they were maybe overly accommodating or weren't owning their needs and boundaries or weren't aware of them. There's a lot of reasons that we can end up sliding into an old relationship pattern when we are kind of unconscious to it. So we bring a lot more awareness and a lot more confidence and support to the parts of you that have a tendency to want to collapse those boundaries so that you can date like a secure person would. All that to say, secure people have this concept of me and we. And very quick overview, the we is the space in between two me's. I know that seems very elementary, but I find it to be really helpful to understand this concept because when we are overly focused on the we before the other person has committed or bought into this concept of a we often, or at least for my clientele who have some history of a little bit of codependency, a little bit of um, over functioning or over giving in relationships. They tend to be very generous and therefore take on people who are happy to have a generous partner and yet don't necessarily feel met by that other person. They either don't feel like it's reciprocal, like they're giving more than they're getting, or the other person has a lot of chaos that this person was stepping in to support and stabilize. And this person feels very drained. And the other person is now like, oh, great, I can relax and receive some support. This is amazing. But this person, who's usually my client, feels a little taken advantage of and a little disillusioned. About 6 months in, they're usually like, "This isn't what I signed up for." So I wanted to talk about me language versus we language because a lot of times when we are focused on, and I'm saying we because this was my background too, this is something that I've had to actively heal and still stay aware of because that is a tendency when you've had this in your history, that it's very easy for you to go those well-worn paths, even in the healing process. So I want to just humanize that and normalize that if this is something that you find yourself struggling with again, even though you feel like you healed it a long time ago, it's very likely that there's a new layer of healing that's available for you to really solidify and ground in those boundaries that support you, keeping your heart open, keeping your authentic self online, and moving you in the direction of your most um, life-giving relationships, the most, I'm going to say evolved in that you are the most mature version of yourself and you're matching with another person who's very mature, so maybe the most mature relationship dynamic that you've had thus far. When we're focused on building a we with someone else, a relationship bubble, we have to both have two separate me's, and that means that we need to be maintaining things that keep us a me, keep the self involved, because that's what's going to be pouring in to the relationship bubble. I've heard of it kind of like this water wheel. My initial teacher, Rory Ray, always talked about the water wheel, in that you have this water wheel coming towards you that is bringing love. And if you've ever seen a water wheel, there's always like some trickles on the back end as the wheel is turning. It's kind of like dripping still. It's not like pouring, but there are still some drips. And those drips are what is going into the we reservoir. We want to have enough love and support and life coming to us that we have those trickles we can give to other people and also pour from overflow. That's the state that we want to be coming from to create a healthy unit, a healthy we space. That said, something that my clients tend to struggle with is thinking in we language instead of me language. So there will be, and I want to talk about this because this is confusing if you think about it in black and white thinking. It's more of a gray scale in that your level of development is going to determine how you use this information. When you are still like deep in the throes of codependency, you're going to be thinking naturally in we language because there's no me. It's a we, and that's where I exist. I exist within the we. That's why you probably have some like love addiction. You have this like compulsion to be in a relationship. You give a lot, you feel needed. And that's what keeps you in these relationship dynamics that require a lot of you. Even if you're not getting a whole lot in return, you're like, it's okay, they're happy, and therefore I'm happy. And what we want to start moving into as we start doing some of this inner work of really reclaiming the ability to be with our emotions, to be in an alone state, to be with loneliness, to be with our fears of abandonment and rejection and the grief of what we didn't have that kind of led us to have those fears. All of that process is what we get to work on being with. Once we have worked on some of that, that's when we are going to start seeing more of a me showing up to attract another person. So that's where we have these two people kind of like working together to create this we in between us. In between us is the space for we. And that is when you get to start thinking, because you have enough me language online of what do I need? What am I looking for? What's important to me? What do I need to be protective of on my own behalf? What do I need to assert? How do my boundaries need to be so that I can stay myself? Then we can start this kind of like upper level. Then we can start thinking about we language. Because when you come at it from a me and a me, you form a we. I feel this. This sounds so silly to hear myself say these things. Um, when you're forming this relationship bubble together, you're actually coming from an empowered space, which, if you have been involved in any of my work, you know that the empowered paradigm of dating and relationship is not a zero sum game. So low in this codependency spectrum, it's either or. I get what I need, or you get what you need. And when we move up the ranks of this, we move into a space of we language where it is assumed that by you getting what you need, I will get what I need in return. This is what we were hoping for in this like low level of codependency. That's the type of philosophy that we were hoping for. It's just that we were given that concept too early. Before we had established ourself, we were given this idea that love is generous and love is an outpouring, and you don't always get what you want, but you always get what you need. You can be generous because it will come back to you. All of those concepts, when you're in the stage of codependency or kind of like this immature relating style, you will naturally be operating from that, but it will be in a one directional thing, either in the direction of always pouring out or in the direction of always trying to get. Either way, it's never going to be this bi-directional, like non-zero sum game. I forget what the positive sum game. There's a term for it. My brain is still recovering from a cold, so apologies, I can't recall it right now. Anyway, so when you are operating from this kind of like higher vantage point of relationships, it's going to be easier for you to work with a win-win paradigm where I get what I need because I'm giving you what you need, and you are getting what you need because you're giving me what I need. When we are both equally investing in this kind of like we space, that's when relationships get to be really fun, because if you're both dumping, all of your overflow, if the water wheels of overflow are going into this relational bucket, it now gets to give more than just a trickle. It is giving a surplus as well, and it creates it creates this self-sustaining space where it feels safe and nourishing for you to dip into the relational space whenever you need to check in on the relational space, to just give because it feels good to give. That is all happening when you are in this space of operating from a me who is also engaged in we. And the we language, I think, is such a sign of empowerment when you are actually in your power. When you are in your power, it will force you. And the reason it has to be when you're in your power is because you have to have enough of your own back. I talk about this all the time. That when you have your own back, you're willing to be truly generous because you're not needing something in return. Obviously, we still need things. It's not like we're needless. You just won't be dependent on someone giving you exactly what you think you need when you're trying to be generous. So it's not a giving to get, it's a giving to give, because you know that when you're giving to give, it amplifies the other person, and there's enough rapport and trust built that they do the same thing in return. And so it creates this kind of interplay between the two of you where you're both generating enough and able to give from overflow and therefore receive the other person's overflow. That's when it gets really, really fun and really juicy and enlivening. But the reason that this is so challenging, I think, for a lot of people and my clients specifically, is they haven't done the work to support their own needs yet and either feel comfortable making them known and really asking for what it is that they want and need in a relationship dynamic and setting the boundary when that's not available to say, like, okay, well, if that's not available, this is how far I'm willing to go. And that sometimes ends up looking like I'm just going to, cut my losses and move forward. And I wish you all the best. And it gets to be this really neutral thing where you just say, like, that's what I'm needing. I don't judge myself for it. And I don't judge the fact that you're not available for it. I'm just going to go find it. And it gets to be way less dramatic and way less scary than when you're trying to get all of your needs from one person at one point in time. So using the we language can be really helpful because you're thinking of it through the lens of my needs are going to get met, and I trust that this person can come up with something maybe even better than I would come up with for myself, which means that if I'm sharing from a vulnerable, neutral space, I can leave it with them. I'm not putting it on them, but I'm leaving it with them, saying, hey, I need a little more affection. I need a little more communication. I need some um, support. I need for you to just listen. I need X, Y, and Z, whatever it is, more physical touch, more sexual connection. I need dot, 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 whatever the thing is. And you can actually just leave that with them because they may need some time to think about what they can do and how they can work with that and what they have to negotiate for with that. Like, okay, if that's what you want, this is what I need in return. You can kind of have this back and forth of negotiation. And that's why I teach a lot of my clients negotiation skills instead of this sort of ultimatum mindset. Ultimatums actually are beautiful. And Alison Armstrong shifted the way that I see ultimatums into a really empowering thing where it gets to just be, this is a walk away point for me. I would rather be, and the language that she uses that I think is just so empowering is, I would rather be alone than not have this. Like, it is that important to me. I'm not going to just stay here um, and not have it. I am willing to just meet it myself, but that also means that I am going to go in a different direction. And it can be really empowering to use that kind of language, not from a space of like a power play, but truly from a self-sovereign space of like, I will just meet this need by myself, um, or find it somewhere else outside of this dynamic because this isn't it. And it gets to just be this neutral expression, or I always kind of think of it like a confession or like a revealing of what is true for you. Because when you're coming from a confession or a revealing space from your feminine truth, and men do this too, you can confess or reveal as well your truth. It is in your body. The other person receives it best when it's coming from your body. There's no kind of, it's inarguable. You're coming like straight up and down on your own 2 feet. You're not like trying to pull them from being way back here in this kind of like feminine language where you're hoping that they read between the lines. You are actually just coming from the space of like, I've got my own back, I've thought this through, and I'm willing to take the consequences, even if that means being alone. And I'm going to leave this with you and trust that you have some idea of what we can do about it or what you're willing to do about it. And if the answer is no, then I will be able to take that in stride, and I might feel sad, and I get to move on at that point and know that I have done everything I needed to do to confess to you my needs. I think confession is a beautiful practice. Carolyn Mace, a teacher that I really admire, she is a she is a professionally trained theologian and operates in more um, mystical uh, truths, kind of connecting the dots of the mystical world, the things that we don't understand, the things that are mysterious to us, bringing those into really tangible practices. And one of the things that she said is every religious practice has a confession. And this ties to our sense of self, our will to move forward, our direction. It's all in that like throat space, the throat chakra, if you will. And I actually love that because there is something so not only cathartic about confessing your truth, but it's actually empowering. It's honoring your power source, which is your will to move, your will to um, do and act and be in the world the way that it feels congruent for you. It all kind of comes from the heart, through the throat, through the mouth. That channel has to be open. And when it's not, because we're not speaking up, and this is something that I had a history of as well, when we're not speaking up and confessing what is true for us, it's very hard for the people around us to see us and relate to us, but for them to also feel safe around us because they can sense that something is not flowing, that something's stuck, and they are hesitant to engage in that way. It's a visceral thing, a nervous system thing, where they can sense it. So back to the we language, when you can start negotiating from a we space, you actually hold more of your power because you're trusting the other person to rise to meet you. And this is a really advanced skill where you're speaking to the other person as if they're in their most empowered energy, as opposed to trying to parent them. A lot of us were modeled parenting from our caregivers to our other caregivers. Our moms tried to parent our dads tried to parent our moms. And that is kind of what we saw in relationships. It was always this like power struggle where one person is dominating or one person's on top and the other person is submitting to the will of the other person. And what we really want is to think of this we language of I know that there's a solution here, and this is how you will get to we language is through this thought pattern. This is what I have found to be very true. The thought pattern of I know there's a solution here. I know that you're capable of finding a solution that works for you, and you're capable of sharing a solution that might work for me too, and then we get to work on it together. So that is kind of like the 4 steps that I work myself through whenever I have to confess something to people that I'm dating or close friends, family members, when I need to confess something that's true for me, that's working or not quite hitting the mark. It can feel really scary, and I have found that the more that I can speak to them as if they are going to receive it from their most empowered energy, the more likely they are to rise to the occasion. Because when we speak to someone's lower power, we're automatically disempowering them in a way that is unconscious. They will respond from their child energy when we speak to them as a parent would, instead of speaking to them partner to partner. And this is one of the hardest habits to break, especially when that's not something that you've been modeled. This is why all of my programs are so heavily reliant on masculine and feminine communication, how we communicate differently, whether you are a man or a woman, whether you feel more dominant in your masculine energy or your feminine core. It's going to determine the way that you communicate. And it is so helpful to understand, at least have a general understanding of how the other side communicates, because it's totally different. And a lot of times the breakdowns happen because we aren't aware of how the other person communicates and we are interpreting as if it was us. We're projecting on them the way that we would respond if we were in that situation. And that almost always leads to a breakdown in um, well, it leads to a breakdown in trust because you are perceiving their behavior as somehow an attack or a threat, and you're going into defensive mode instead of keeping the space open to um, creative ideas, possibilities, the option of them being fully seen as someone who is 3 dimensional and has history and experiences and their own needs and their own priorities and belief systems you start to see all of that come online, the more you can hold some space for that person to show up fully as a human. And that is what I love helping people with, is understanding what's just human response and what is truly a red flag in terms of this is a wound that's on them. So that you can start to see what's them and what's us, what's theirs, what's mine, and not take responsibility for what is theirs, but let them really hold that for themselves and see just how powerful they are. That's the part of them that you want to be in awe of, that you get to connect with, that you get to be attracted to. And you start attracting that level of partner when you're willing to work from this space of fully sovereign me operating in a we. So I hope this was helpful. I would love to hear how this landed for you. Feel free to like it, share it with a friend, and also leave me a message in the comments if there is more information that you're wanting, or any other topics that you would like to have some information on. I really want to start doing these more often. So it would mean the world to me to have some feedback from you and some engagement, so that I am providing what you're actually wanting. I want to be of service to what you're actually needing, and I would love to know what that is. So I hope you have a beautiful day, and I will talk to you soon.